In this video, you will get lessons from this #1 bestseller book. I'm offering this lesson to you for free as part of my company's mission to help you reach your music dreams and have fun along the way. You will find the playlist with all videos from this course in the video description and comments. There may be information in previous videos that will make the video you are watching now easier to understand. I recommend watching the videos in order. Hi, I'm Dan Spencer, author of the Best Music Theory book for beginners. Over 5,000 people have purchased this book, pushing it to hit #1 bestseller in its category on Amazon. Finally, if you would like to get this #1 book, the workbook, for free, along with quizzes, interactive flashcards, and more bonuses, links are in the video description and in the comments. And now, here is the next lesson and the Best Music Theory course, Level 1. So far, you've learned how to use notes, quarter notes, half notes, and whole notes in measures for writing and reading and also performing or clapping. So you know how to read, write, and understand quarter notes, half notes, and whole notes, which are great for sound. But what about silence? Because as we know, rhythm, like a light switch, is sound and silence. We're not talking about how low or how high the notes are. We're just concerned whether there is sound or there is silence. So what we're going to talk about today and over the next couple lessons are going to be rests. And rests in music are symbols that show us silence. And the different symbols mean different durations of silence. So just like we had rhythmic value for notes, so a quarter note was worth 1 beat, a half note worth 2, and a whole note worth 4, we're actually going to see we have a similar thing show up in rests. Rests are silent. You're not going to clap them or play them or perform them. You'll just sort of count in your head or aloud when they happen and just sort of watch them go by. When you are clapping and there's rests, I actually like to do an anti-clap. So whenever there's a rest, so let's say there's a quarter note, clap, quarter rest, anti-clap. That way you keep some sort of movement going and you can acknowledge the rest a little bit better. Let's talk rests versus notes. We have whole notes. Those get 4 beats or 4 counts. We also have whole rests. Those get 4 beats, 4 counts. This guy right here. Yep, that's the whole rest. Okay, then we have half rests. And sure enough, those are going to get, you guessed it, 2 beats or 2 counts, half rests. Let's take a look at those. Zooming on in. Yep, they look kind of like whole rests, but a little different. So half rests, 2 beats, 2 counts. And then we also have quarter rests, which get 1 beat or 1 count each. Let's zoom in, take a look at those. Oh, those are complicated looking, aren't they? Scary things, quarter rests, but don't worry, we're going to walk you through how to write this. Now, there's an interesting piece of information I'm going to bring up to you several times over the next several lessons, and that is going to be a whole rest can be used in any time signature to show a full measure of rest or a full measure of silence. Now, I'll go into that more in depth the next time you hear it, but I want to plant the seed so you really start to get that one. So let's do a quick comparison here. 4 beats or 4 counts, that's either going to be a whole note or a whole rest. 2 beats or 2 counts, that's going to be a half note, stem up, half note, stem down, or a half rest. And 1 beat or 1 count is going to be quarter note, stem up, or stem down, or a quarter rest. I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about how to write whole rests, half rests, and quarter rests. We're going to do this in 2 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk and I'm going to point, and I'm going to break things down for you. And in the second part, I'm actually going to get on the iPad and write the rests in real time so you can do it with me in your workbook to make sure we are all on the same page on exactly how to write rests. So let's get started talking about whole rests. So whole rest is a small little rectangle, and it hangs down from the 4th line of the staff. The rectangle is the same length as a closed note head. Don't make your rectangles like this long. And the rest hangs down 50% of the way between the 3rd and the 4th lines of the staff. Let's zoom in and take a look at that. Yeah, you can see that space between line 3 and line 4, right here. Whoop. Yeah, right there. You see that space between line 3 and line 4? It's about 50-50. 50% taken up by the rest, and then 50% taken up by space. Pretty even division there. Also, we got some ketchup and mustard colors going on. Didn't plan it, but glad it happened. Now, in 4/4, you'll write whole rests at the beginning of measures on beat 1. So you'll write it the same place you wrote the whole note. Whereas in 3/4, you're actually going to write the whole rest in the middle of the measure. Now, remember we talked about in the last lesson that a whole rest can be used in any time signature to show an entire measure of silence. Well, sure enough, we can also do that in 3/4. We can show that there's a whole rest, and even though you're only supposed to have 3 beats worth of content in a measure of 3/4, you can have the whole rest in there to show that it's taking up the entire 3 beats of silence. That's just one of those weird music theory rules. Okay, let's talk about half rests. Half rests are small little rectangles that rise or sit on top of the third line of the staff, line number 3. The rectangle is the same length as the closed note head, which is also the same length as the whole rest. And just like the whole rest took up 50% of the space between line 4 and line 3, again, the half rest is going to take up half the space. So you can see that half the space is open for mustard or other condiments. Okay. Lastly but not leastly, we have our quarter rests. Now, quarter rests, I'm going to walk you through how to write them, but I'm going to talk you through it the first time. So you're going to start a diagonal line going down to the right, below line 5, attaching to line 4. Then you write a diagonal line to the left, connecting line 4 to 3, then to the right, ending before line 2, and then we hook around ending before line 1. Don't worry, I know that was complicated. I'm going to walk you through how to do it. Also, your workbook walks you through how to do it step by step. Don't worry, I got you. I'll see you in the next lesson where I'm actually going to write the whole rest, half rest, and quarter rest and talk you through it as we go. I'll see you there. This is part 2 on how to write whole rests, half rests, and quarter rests. In your workbook, you have a bunch of exercises where you can actually trace the rests, practice writing them, looking at them, copying them. That's all well and good, but sometimes having someone actually show you and talk you through it in real time is super duper helpful. So, whole rests always hang down from line 4. So let's count up 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, you could write a whole rectangle. I like to make my life easy and just write 3 sides of a rectangle. Oh, well, we brought it home. That's okay. That's a whole rest. Show you one more time. Zoomed in real close. You can either write 3/4 of a rectangle, or you can bring it home, color it in, about the same size as a closed note head would be for a quarter note. Make sure that you leave that space, that all-important space, here. You want to have 50%. Half the space here is taken up by the rest. Half the space is taken up by, well, more space, or ketchup, if we could continue our condiments theme from the last lesson. So, let's talk about half rests. Half rests are basically the same thing as a whole rest, except instead of hanging down from line 4, they rise up from line 3. I know it can be confusing because they're so close to each other. Just think, whole rests get 4 counts. They hang down from the 4th line. And then I don't have a fancy thing for half rests, so we're just going to move and groove with that. So, half rests. Again, either make your rectangle or 3/4 of a rectangle. See, 3/4 of a rectangle would just look like this. And you use that extra line. And then you use line 3 of the staff as the 4th line of the rectangle. Then you just color it in. That's it. Make sure you leave that space right up top. You got to leave space. You do not want to see your whole rest looking or your half rests looking like this. You see how that takes up the entire space? Now, once it takes up the entire space and I go, okay, is that a half rest or a whole rest? You'll have no idea because it's taking up the whole space, so we can't tell the difference. Okay, lastly, quarter rests. Okay, so we're going to start under line 5 of the staff, go down to line 4. Then we're going to go diagonally to line 3. Then we're going to come back to just above line 2 and then circle around and done. Okay, I'm going to walk you through that one again. So we start below line 5, down to the right to line 4. Then from 4 to 3, back the way we came. Then from 3 to just above 2, and then hook around to the left. Oh, that's a nice quarter rest. We'll do one more quarter rest. Here we go. Below 5 to 4, 4 to 3, 3 to just above 2, and hook around. I will see you in the next lesson. In the next 2 lessons, we are going to be clapping and counting examples with rests in them. So remember, we can actually do anti-claps while we count. So let's practice doing an anti-clap together for that first measure. So we can see the time signature is 3/4, and there's a whole rest there. Remember, whole rest can go in any time signature to show a full measure of rest. So all we would do there is 1, 2, 3. See how I just like shook my hands? 1, 2, 3. Or you could clap, anti-clap. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Just like that. And then we have a half rest in the next measure, which is going to take up 2 beats or 2 counts. And we could practice not clapping that by going 1, 2, or 1, 2. And then in the third measure, on beat 2, we have a quarter rest, which just be 1 or 1. Just like that. So I'll go through it really slow one time, and then I'll do it with the metronome. So I'm going to give myself a count in of 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Just like that. All right, this is going to be example 18 with the metronome. Listen until you can anticipate where the next pulse is going to be. Check the time signature. I'm looking at the time signature. It is 3/4. That means I'm going to give myself a count in of 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There you go. That's it. Let's take a look at number 19. Again, let's practice doing this one time, no metronome. I'm going to talk you through it, walk you through it. So, looking at the top number of the time signature, it is 4, which means we're going to have 4 beats or 4 counts in every measure. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's measure 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. With the metronome. Here we go. Get the pulse. Look at the time signature. 1, 2. Here we 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Excelente, pasta al dente. I will see you in the next lesson. We're going to clap 3 more examples taken from real pieces of music. These next examples we are going to clap are going to be 20, 21, and 22 from the Best Music Theory book for beginners. Now, these examples are taken from famous operas. Now, why, you may be asking me, Dan, on earth, are we doing songs from operas? Well, it's because they have very easy drum parts in them, and this is the best I could find that was going to be good for you to clap. That was a real piece of music that you could actually clap something real that also just use whole, half, and quarter notes and rests. So that's the main reason, but it's also kind of cool to learn some history and check out some interesting pieces along the way. This is going to be from the Ring Cycle by Wagner. So you'll notice there's something a little different about this piece of music too, and that is it's 2 lines long. So what happens is when we have a piece of music that is 2 lines long, what we do is we read from left to right, like that, and then guess what we do? We go to the second line, and we read from left to right. Left to right, new line, left to right, just like if you were reading a book. This is bass drum part on page 28, measures 3 through 10 of the Firstener publication. Let's rock and roll. So we get the pulse, count in 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Second line. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In this next piece, you'll notice that there are, again, 2 lines of music. So we're going to read through the first line, then we're going to read through the second line. This is actually from Rusalka by Antonin Dvorak, and this opera actually tells the story of the Little Mermaid. Now, you'll notice that there's these little numbers above the notes, like that little 57 there, and then over here, that 61. These are actually called measure numbers, and very often you will see those numbers above the staff to indicate what measure you are in. So let's rock and roll. Looking at the time signature, common time, that basically means 4/4. So counting is going to be like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In our last example, Les Vêpres Siciliennes, we have a Giuseppe Verdi opera here. Now we have 3 lines, and for a 3-line piece of music, well, we're going to do the first line. Then we're going to do the second line. Then we're going to do the third line, just like that. And we don't stop or pause between. We go straight from the end of the first line to the second line, and straight from the end of the second line to the third line. Count in, get the pulse, look at the time signature. So I'm going to call out the measure numbers as we go to make sure you know exactly where we are. So we're starting at measure 45, and that's really measure 1 on this piece of music. But in that opera, it'd be measure 45. The second line will be at measure 49. The third line will be at measure 53. So I'll call out those numbers as we go. Count in. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 49. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 53. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to do a deep dive into measure math once again. Measure math 2, we're actually going to use rests and notes together. So, quick recap. 4 beats or 4 counts is going to be a whole note or a whole rest. 2 beats or 2 counts is going to be a half rest or a half note. And 1 beat or 1 count is going to be a quarter rest or a quarter note. So let's look at some examples of measure math in 4/4 with incorrect and correct. So we can see, just looking at our incorrect example here, measure 1, well, there's a quarter note and a quarter rest. That's 1 plus 1. That equals 2. That's no good. Over here we have a quarter rest, a quarter note, a quarter rest, a quarter note, a quarter rest, and a quarter note. That would equal 6 beats, which is not correct because the time signature is 4/4, so we need 4 beats or 4 counts worth of content in every measure, no more, no less. See, in this measure, we just have 1 quarter rest. Well, that's worth 1 beat, and how many do we need? 4. Over here, we have 3 beats or 3 counts, no Boinskis, we need 4. Now let's look at our correct example. Ooh, whole note, 4 beats, 4 counts. Half note plus, yeah, that's a half rest rising up from line 3. Oh, that's 4 beats. Let's see, half rest plus a quarter note plus a quarter rest. Sure enough, that is 4. 2 for the half rest, 1 for the quarter note, and 1 for the quarter rest. And then over here, we have, again, 4 beats. We have 1 quarter rest, 1 half note, and 1 quarter rest. That's a total of 4, count them, 4 beats. Let's look at some incorrect and correct measure math for 3/4. So the time signature is 3/4. We need 3 beats or 3 counts in every measure. Well, 1 quarter note, that's not right. 1 half rest and 1 half note. That's 4 beats. That's not right. And then we have a whole rest plus a quarter note. Well, that's not right for sure. And then a quarter rest plus a quarter note. Well, that's only 2 beats. So that's no good because we need 3 beats or 3 counts in every measure. Now, in the correct measure math, this is the correct measure math, we have 3 beats or 3 counts. And you might be saying, well, hang on a second, that there is a whole rest. And you'd be right. But remember, a whole rest can be used in any time signature to show an entire measure of silence. It sort of morphs itself to whatever time signature you're in. It changes itself to whatever time signature you're in to be worth that number of beats. In the next measure, we have a quarter note, a quarter rest, and a quarter note. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3. In the next measure, we have a quarter note plus a half note. 1 plus 2 equals 3. In the next measure, we have 1 quarter rest and 2 quarter notes, which equals 3 beats or 3 counts. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about how to write lines of music when there's two lines of music, not just 4 measures, but 8 measures now of music. First, I'm going to talk you through it and show you the pictures, and then I'll actually walk you through it in the next lesson, writing in real time so you can get a good sense of how to do it. So we're going to start off by getting 2 staves. That's right, when you have 2 staffs and you put them together, they become a staves. That's the plural when you have more than 1. So what you're going to do with the 2 staves, you divide them both in half and both into quarters with regular bar lines. Then, and this is very interesting, at the end of both, on the right side of both staves, you are going to put on the top one a regular bar line, and at the bottom one a final bar line. I'm going to zoom out so you can really see that. There you go. Regular bar line, final bar line. Step number 3. You're going to put percussion clefs on both staves, not just the top one, on both staves. Each one gets a percussion clef. And finally, step 4, you're going to add the time signature only to the first stave. So let's recap the difference between the clef and the time signature. Clefs go on all staves. Time signature only goes on the top stave. Let's recap and review. Step number 1, you're going to divide 2 staves in halves, then quarters. Then you're going to add on the right side, you're going to close the first stave off with a regular bar line, and on the second stave, you're going to write a final bar line. Then you're going to write percussion clefs for both staves. Finally, you're going to write your time signature 4/4, 3/4, or C for common time on the first stave only. I will see you in the next lesson where I'm actually going to walk you through setting up 2 staves for 8 measures, both for 4/4 and for 3/4. I'll see you there. In this lesson, I'm going to talk you through and walk you through writing 8 measures all in a row on 2 separate staves. So let's go ahead and first divide our 2 staves into halves with a bar line. Boom. Boom. Then we divide them in quarters. Boom. Boom. Bada boom. Boom. Then what we need to do is we need to look at the right side. I'm going to zoom in just so you can really see it. We're going to write a regular bar line to close off the first line, and we're going to write a final bar line on the second line. Then we're going to write percussion clef on both staves. Staff number 1 gets a percussion clef. Staff number 2 gets a percussion clef. Then we write the time signature only on the top stave. In this case, I'm going to do 4/4, but I'm going to go back and do all this again for 3/4, just so you can see it again. And there you go. That's 8 measures in a row that you're now going to be able to write original rhythmic compositions in. Okay, let's do this again, but this time for 3/4. We're going to start off dividing the staves into half with a single bar line. 1 and 2. Then we divide the staves into quarters with 2 more bar lines. Well, 2 more bar lines each for a total of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then what we got to do is we got to zoom in all the way over here. And I'm zooming in so you can see, obviously, if you're working on paper, you don't zoom in. Well, maybe you bring your head closer to the paper and that's how you zoom in. But anyway, we close off the first line with a regular bar line, and the second line of staff is where we write our final bar line. Now we come back to the left side and we see you have nothing there. I'll clean that up just a little bit. And then we're going to write percussion clef for both lines. 1, 2, 1, 2. And then we're going to write our time signature on the top. In this case, it's going to be 3. Oops, I was looking up at my screen. I got a little messy, but that's okay. 4. 3/4. And that's 8 measures for 3/4. I will see you in the next lesson. Over the next 2 lessons, we're going to be talking about how to write both notes and rests in measures. Now, this does get a little bit complicated, so we have a really awesome, unique, nifty color coding system that you'll see in a moment. So first, let's talk about some rest rules. We have 6 rules for rests. Please feel free to come back to this page whenever you are writing music. Rule number 1 is a rest starting on a strong beat can, C-A-N, can, it is able to last into a weak beat. Rule number 2 is a rest starting on a weak beat cannot last into the next beat or beats. Use separate rests. That one's interesting. 3, when possible, combine smaller rests into larger rests as long as this does not break the previous 2 rules. Ooh. If your head's starting to spin, don't worry, we're going to break it down. Number 4, a whole rest shows a measure of silence in all time signatures. You might remember that one. 5, whole rest should be written at the beginning of a measure in 4/4, whereas in 3/4, we're going to write them in the middle of a measure. And that's rule number 6. So let's review our strong and weak beat colors. Strongest beats are green, strong beats are yellow, weak beats are orange, weakest beats are red. And the order of strongest and weakest beats in 4/4 is going to be strongest, weak, strong, weakest, and in 3/4 is strongest, weak, weakest. Now, you're going to start to see how this really matters for writing rests and notes. So, let's look at this. Whole rests. Well, whole notes, sure enough, those can go on strongest beats. Half notes can go on strongest, strong, and weak beats. Very true. Quarter notes can go on all 4 types of beats. A whole rest can only go on a strongest beat unless it's in 3/4, in which case you write it in the middle of the measure. A half rest can only be written on a strongest or a strong beat, and a quarter rest can go on any beat. Let's review this before we move forward. We have 6 rules for rests, and don't worry, we're going to see those rules in application. A rest starting on a strong beat it is able to, it is good if a rest starting on a strong beat goes to a weak beat. A rest starting on a weak beat cannot last into the next beats, so it has to only be on that weak beat. If you want the next beat after a weak beat to be silent, you need to use another rest. Whenever possible, you're going to combine smaller rests into larger rests, as long as it doesn't break the previous 2 rules. And that's really, rule number 3 is really for beginners, because you're going to have a moment where you have like 4 quarter rests in a row, and then you're like, wait, hang on, oh, there was rule 3, combine. Because if you do rule number 1 or rule number 2 perfectly, you will not find yourself with rule number 3. So rule number 3 is just to catch you if you made a mistake in rule number 1 or rule number 2. A whole rest shows a measure of silence in all time signatures. In whole rests, we write them at the beginning of measures in 4/4, and we write them in the middle of measures in 3/4. I will see you in the next lesson. There is one key concept for you to understand before we look at correct and incorrect examples for 4/4 and 3/4 using a combination of notes and rests, and that is the imaginary divide between beats 2 and 3 when we are in 4/4 or common time. This imaginary divide, nothing can cross it. It's like an imaginary barrier that nothing can pass except for 3 things: a whole rest, a whole note, and a half note. The 3 things that can cross this barrier are a whole note, a whole rest, and a half note. So let's see some examples of this in application. So we imagine that there is a divide between beats 2 and 3 right here. Now we have a problem because this half rest starts on beat 2 and lasts into beat 3, right? Because half rests get 2 beats, they get 2 counts. Now right there, that's crossing our imaginary divide. That is wrong. No, sir, cannot do that. Let's look at one more. This is actually almost the same example, but I'll do it again just to make sure you get it. So we have a half rest starting on beat 2. That's wrong for a number of reasons, but this is one of the reasons. Half rest starts on beat 2, lasts into beat 3. There's an imaginary divide between beats 2 and 3. Half rest is not one of the 3 things that can cross. The 3 things that can cross are a whole rest, a whole note, or a half note. And a half rest is not one of those. That's wrong. That is not okay. Now let's look at a correct example. Oh, right here we have indeed beat 2 half note lasts into beat 3 because a half note is worth 2 beats or 2 counts, so it's worth all of this. But that's okay because there's 3 things that can cross our imaginary divide between beats 2 and 3, and those are whole notes, whole rests, and half notes. So an easy way to remember which type of rest you can use where is to think to yourself, okay, if I put a half rest on beat 2, because I want 2 beats of consecutive silence, I want beats 2 and 3 to be quiet, so I'm going to put a half rest on beat 2. That's wrong because of that divide between beats 2 and 3, and a half rest cannot cross it. So that's incorrect. I'll see you in the next lesson where we talk even more about the divide between beats 2 and 3 in the time signature of 4/4 or common time. And we also look at some correct and incorrect examples and how they're breaking our 6 rest rules from the previous page and the previous lesson. I'll see you guys there. In this lesson, we're going to be breaking down some correct and incorrect examples using a mix of notes and rests, but mainly we're going to be focusing on the rests to show why they are incorrect in the incorrect examples and why they are right in the correct examples. So all of these measures sound exactly the same. They're just written differently. It's like writing the word to, T-O-O, versus T-O versus T-W-O. They all sound the same, but they're written differently. All right, let's take a look at this first one. Okay, so this is incorrect for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's crossing our imaginary divide between beats 2 and 3, and there's only 3 things that can cross that divide, and that is a whole note, a whole rest, and a half note. So that's no good from that perspective. And then also, rest rule number 2, we cannot start a rest on a weak beat and then have it last into another beat. So anytime you want to have a rest on a weak beat, it's most likely going to be a quarter note because that rest cannot continue on into the next beat. You need to write a second notation, which might be another quarter rest in the case of this, to get the correct. So let's look at the correct example, and sure enough, we got 2 quarter rests, which means number 1, we have our divide between beats 2 and 3, very clean. And number 2, the rest on the weak beat is not lasting into the next beat. Here is our next incorrect example. We have a quarter rest on beat 1, 2, and 3 on the strongest, weak, and strong beats. Okay, so this right here, this example is interesting. So we do have the divide between beats 2 and 3, so that's good. Now, the problem is, this is actually breaking rest rule number 3, and rest rule number 3 is that we need to combine any smaller rests into larger rests whenever possible. And sure enough, because we have this strongest beat here, it's okay, rest rule number 1, it's okay to have rests that last into other beats if they start on strong beats. That's last for 2. Let's go over, look at the correct one. Sure enough, we have a half rest lasting for 2 beats, and it's okay for the half rest to be there because it's starting on a strong beat, and the half rest is not starting on a weak beat. So another way to think of this is you can look at the color coding too, and the color coding shows these same rules. It's like you can't write a half rest on a weak beat or a weakest beat. You can't do it. Anytime you want a weak beat or a weakest beat to be quiet, there to be silence, you need a quarter rest. You can, C-A-N can, you are able to write a half rest on strongest and strong beats. Always. Always. That's always cool. Let's break down one more incorrect example. Okay, so this is wrong. Well, number 1, because we need our divide between beats 2 and 3. I don't know why that turned an arrow, but here we go, right? This cannot do that. That's a no. And that's really the only thing that's wrong here. Now, keep in mind that what we want here is we want 3 beats of silence, right? So beat 2, 3, and 4. These all have rests on it, right? Shh. We want rests on beats 2, 3, and 4. So we want one sound, we want one attack on beat 1, and then on 2, 3, and 4, shh, we want silence. So let's take a look at what that looks like when we write it correctly. And sure enough, because you cannot have that half rest on a weak beat, and you also don't want to break the divide between beats 2 and 3, only 3 things can do that: a whole rest, a whole note, and a half note. Very good. We have our half rest written on beat 2 because we want 3 beats of silence in a row. Remember, we have beats 2, 3, and 4. Shh. We want silent. Over here, beats 2, 3, 4. Again. Yep. They all have rests on them. They're all silent. So these measures sound exactly the same. They're just written differently. So on our weak beat, we have our quarter rest, and starting on our strong beat, we have the half rest that lasts, very correctly, 2 beats. Now, it would not be correct to have a quarter rest here and a quarter rest here because rule number 3, whenever possible, we need to combine rests, and that gets us our half rest there. In this lesson, we're going to continue to break down the correct and incorrect uses of notes and specifically rests in measures. So just a quick reminder that whenever we see 4/4 common time, we're going to imagine there is a divide between beats 2 and 3. There's a divide right down the middle of the measure. So we can see here in our first incorrect example that that half rest would start on beat 2 and it would last into beat 3, right? Because it gets 2 beats. So it starts here and really it lasts all the way up to here, right? It's 2 beats of silence. Now that's crossing our imaginary line, which is a no. Cannot do that. So the correct way of writing that would be 2 quarter rests. That way we have, yay, the imaginary line between beats 2 and 3. So let's look at this incorrect example. This example is incorrect for 2 reasons, actually very similarly to the first example. This is incorrect because we have a rest starting on a weak beat going into a strong beat. Whenever we have a rest on a weak beat, we need to write a different rest on the next beat. It is also incorrect because that rest is crossing our imaginary divide between beats 2 and 3. That half rest right here lasts for 2 beats. It gets 2 counts. No. We don't want that. So the way we're actually going to show this, keep in mind right here, we're talking about 3 beats of rest. 3 beats of rest. So we want 3 counts all in a row on 2, 3, and 4 of silence. How are we going to show that? This is how we show it. Number 1, we have our imaginary divide between beats 2 and 3. Number 2, we have the rest that is starting on the weak beat, stays on the weak beat, and then we have a new rest starting on the next beat. Let's look at one more in 4/4. This is actually a correct example. So let's say a whole note starts here. Yep, it can last through, so technically crossing the divide because it's worth 4 counts. And a half note, sure enough, can start on beat 2 and last into beat 3 and cross the divide. That is A-OK to do. I will see you in the next lesson where we're going to break down some correct and incorrect examples in 3/4. In this lesson, we're going to be breaking down examples in 3/4 with incorrect and correct rests. Now, 3/4 is a little easier than 4/4 because we don't need to think about that imaginary divide, or maybe it's harder than 4/4 because we don't have that imaginary divide to rely on. Let's unpack some measures, shall we? Okay, so this is incorrect because it is breaking rest rule number 2. You cannot have a rest start on a weak beat and last into the next beat. No, cannot have that. So let's break down what we want to have happen here. What we want to have happen here is we want a sound on beat 1, right? We want a coordinate on beat 1, and then we want 2 beats of silence. We want beat 2 and 3 to be silent. How are we going to write that correctly? There you go, just like that. So whenever you have a weak or weakest beat that you want to be silent, you need that quarter rest. You need the quarter rest. Always. Always, always, always. We can go back, we can look at our colors, and sure enough, half rests, you see that? Half rests only go on green or yellow, they only go on strongest or strong. Only. No exceptions. Now let's talk about one more. In 3/4, we have a quarter rest on beat 1, and we have a quarter rest on beat 2, and then a quarter note on beat 3. So essentially what we want is 2 beats of shh. Beat 1, beat 2. We want silent. Now the problem here is that this is breaking rest rule number 3, that all rests must be combined if they can. If you remember, we just talked about this, that the half rest can go on green or yellow. And so sure enough, what we need to do is we need to combine those 2 rests into a half rest that lasts for 2 beats. So look, it sounds exactly the same. 2 beats of silence here, 2 beats of silence here. We're just following the rules in the correct example. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to give you some composition ideas for you to start writing different rhythmic compositions with for either 4 measures or, as you learned how to do a couple lessons ago, 8 measures at a time. So these are just 1 measure examples of different combinations of notes and rests. Here's 2 examples of 2 beats of rest in a row using half rests in 4/4. Here's 1 beat of rest and a half note. That's fun. Here's 1 beat of rest and a half note in 3/4. Here's 2 consecutive beats of rest and quarter notes, which is very interesting. So we can have a half rest, 2 quarter notes. We're going to have a quarter note, quarter rest, quarter rest. Why? Why can we not write a half rest there? Well, for 2 reasons. Number 1, we have our imaginary divide. And number 2, half rests cannot start on a weak beat. And in 4/4, beat 2 is, weak. And then finally, we can have a half rest starting on beat 3. 2 consecutive beats of rest and a quarter note in 3/4. This is always very interesting. Whenever you see 3/4, remember, you're always going to have these 2 quarter rests on the end because beat 2 is weak. So you cannot start a half rest there. It's always got to be 2 quarter rests, whereas at the beginning, our first beat is strongest, which means a half rest can start there. Here's 1 beat of rest. So basically just going to juggle around a quarter note. There you go. So that's 1 beat on beat 1, 1 beat of rest on beat 2, 1 beat of rest on beat 3, 1 beat of rest on beat 4, and then the same thing in 3/4. Now, these are not things for you to copy or follow. These just give you an idea of different combinations of notes and rests. There are so many more combinations out there than what we have right here. And I will see you in the next lesson. Oh, but it's not over yet. Click here to watch the next video lesson or up here for the full video playlist.